Hello, and welcome to Own Your Retirement. My name is Albert from Kaizen Financial. If you'd like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 586-752-7008 or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. That's Kaizen, Kaizen. And while on my website, click on the podcast page to check out our past shows and to subscribe to our program on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. All right. So there's a question I hear all the time in my office, and it usually sounds something like this. I've done everything I'm supposed to do, so why don't I feel ready to retire? Now, it's a fair question, and it comes up more than you might expect. A lot of people assume retirement readiness is a feeling you're supposed to have, like, let's say, a light switch that flips once you saved enough, but that's not really how it works. During this episode, we'll be analyzing a Kiplinger article headlined 7 Signs You Are Financially Ready to Retire Even If You Don't Feel Ready. Now, it walks through 7 concrete numbers-based signs that could mean someone is more prepared than they realize. But before we begin with that, let me introduce my co-host, Tony Shore, who's here to share his wit and wisdom with us. Hey, Tony, how we doing, buddy?
Well, good, but wit and wisdom. It's a definite maybe on the wit, and I don't know on the wisdom.
You've got plenty of wisdom. Are you kidding me?
That's why you're here, Albert. Is for the wisdom. That's your role. But Albert, I think this topic hits close to home for a lot of folks, and I know people who could probably retire tomorrow, but they'd still tell you they're nervous about it, or they don't think they could. So you got to look for these signs, and I know you're going to help us out with this. I know you just got back from a big trip. You met with some other advisors, and you took a little vacation. How did that go?
It was great. We went to Costa Rica, up in the Liberia or Guanacaste area. Very, very nice. Warm, humid, but can't complain. There was plenty of water around to dip into, so
nice.
It was a good time. Away for about a week, and
wow,
no, it was good weather. We didn't get all the rain that it normally comes at this time of the year, so we got lucky on that. But
that's really good.
Some howling monkeys, white-faced monkeys, sloths, iguanas. You name it, we saw it all there. So
you saw monkeys out in the wild, huh?
Monkeys. We saw alligators or crocodiles, whichever that they have there. Little baby ones, and this little the Maccabee. We did this little it's a Maccabee type of tour on one of the rivers. I got to see all these little baby crabs, different types of heron, birds, to you name it. It was there, all kinds of wildlife. If all you had to do was open your eyes and you saw all kinds of stuff. So it was really neat.
Yeah, I've heard it. I've never been there, but I heard it's neat. You're kind of in a jungle, and I think it'd be wild to see some of those monkeys and some of those animals in the wild, right?
Especially the howlers. They just howl, and it sounds like a deep grunt bark of a dog. But in the beginning, I'm going, man, this is getting closer to us. So, but they can actually scream out 1.5 miles away, and you can still hear them very loud.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah,
wow. I've heard of howler monkeys, but I didn't know that's exactly why. I assumed it was because of a noise they made. That's crazy, though. They are loud. I've been called a howler monkey once or twice in my life. Not since breakfast. Not since breakfast.
That's as long as you have your breakfast.
But where do you want to start with this topic? Signs that we're ready to retire.
Yeah, let's start with a stat that kind of sets the tone for this whole conversation. In fact, according to NerdWallet research noted in the article, only 23% of Americans checked their progress toward retirement savings goals in the past year. Like, wow, only 23%, Tony.
Wow. And I think a lot of people aren't even looking then at where they're at.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is basically, this is how it plays out, like what I see in my office on a regular basis. Someone comes in who has done everything right for, let's say, decades, steady contributions, paid off the house, no consumer debt, and they still tell me they just don't feel ready. So once we actually sit down and walk through their numbers together, they're often in great shape. They simply hadn't looked closely before that conversation. And a lot of my clients afterwards, they go to me and say, wow, you always make me feel good about retirement. And it's not me, it's their numbers.
Right. And I find it remarkable that somebody could be that prepared and not even know it.
Oh my gosh, it
That's what
happens.
surprises
It
me.
happens more than you would get. People would guess. Seriously, Tony, it's almost like retirement readiness lives in two separate places. There's the version on paper, and then there's the version in someone's head. And those two versions don't always talk to each other, so to speak. And so here's the disconnect that makes this so interesting on, let's say, a broader scale too. So Vanguard's 2025 retirement outlook, highlighted in the article, found that more than 4 in 10 Americans are actually on track to maintain their lifestyle in retirement. Yet a lot of those same people still express doubt about whether they're prepared.
Hmm.
Isn't that
That's
something?
Yeah, that's a striking gap between the numbers, the actual facts, and how people feel, right?
It is. And that's really the heart of today's show. We want to walk through 7 concrete signs that could suggest someone is more ready than they feel, starting with savings benchmarks.
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to start. Obviously, savings. What are we looking at there?
Well, financial service professionals tend to use age based milestones to, let's say, gauge readiness. In fact, the article explains that Fidelity has a commonly referenced guideline here that suggests having roughly 1 times your salary saved by age 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, 8 times by 60, and then 10 times by your annual income by the age of 67.
Hmm. I bet that 10 times number can sound a little shocking to some people when you first hear it, right?
It can. And I think it helps to understand the assumption behind it, though. That guideline is generally built around needing somewhere between 70 and 80% of your pre retirement income each year to maintain your lifestyle. Now, it's not meant to sit untouched, it's meant to be drawn down over what could be a retirement lasting, let's say, 25 or 30 years.
Hmm. So if somebody's hitting those benchmarks or getting close, that could be a good sign then.
Yeah, it could be, in fact. And I'd add that these are guideposts, not a pass fail test. Someone's specific number depends heavily on their own expected spending, not just a benchmark in isolation. So let's say a person with a paid off home and simple taste might just be fine below the benchmark, while someone planning extensive travel might need more than their benchmark.
Sure. And if somebody's behind, a little behind at a given age, that's not necessarily a crisis either, is it?
No, not at all. In fact, plenty of people catch up quickly in their final working years, especially once, let's say, a mortgage is paid off or kids are finally through school and off payroll. The benchmark is meant to spark a conversation, not deliver a verdict. So the real question is always whether the specific number supports the specific plan someone has in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's sign number 2?
Ah, having multiple income streams in place. Now, this is something we talk about often because relying on just one source, whether that's Social Security alone or a single pension, could leave you vulnerable to policy changes or plan issues down the road.
Okay. What does a strong setup usually look like?
Well, generally, we like to see 3 or more income sources working together in what I call mailbox money. That could include Social Security, distributions from accounts like 401ks, IRAs, or even Roth IRAs, and then something else layered on top, whether that's a pension, rental income, or maybe even some part time work for some folks.
Yeah, and I would imagine that gives people more flexibility as well, not just security, but
Yeah.
flexibility.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's right. And there are multiple streams available. There could be more flexibility to adjust which account gets tapped based on market conditions, tax planning opportunities in any given year. Now, remember, it's not just about diversifying for safety, it's about giving your future self options.
Hmm. I like that. That's a good way to put it. So, what's next on the list?
Well, sign 3 is debt, specifically whether it's eliminated or at least manageable heading into retirement. Carrying significant debt into retirement could dramatically increase the income needed to maintain a given lifestyle. So that's why many financial service professionals recommend entering retirement either debt free or with only low interest, manageable debt left.
Yeah, I mean, there's good debt and bad debt, and like that low interest, manageable debt, a mortgage, for example, right?
Yeah, right. Like if someone has paid off their mortgage or is on pace to pay it off within the first, let's say, a few years of retirement, and they're carrying no high interest credit card balances, man, that clears one of the more significant obstacles to retirement security.
Yeah.
There is a nuance worth mentioning here, though, Tony.
Yep.
Not all debt is necessarily bad debt in this context.
Yeah, explain that to us. Like, how is a mortgage not bad debt?
Well, let's say if you have a mortgage at a very low rate, let's say at 2% rate, it might actually make more sense to keep that debt in place rather than paying it off, especially if your investment could reasonably be expected to grow faster than the interest you're paying. Now, it really depends on the full tax picture and what the portfolio is doing. So it's worth a conversation with a financial service professional rather than assuming all debt just needs to disappear before retirement. Now, we see this come up often with people who refinance years ago when rates were unusually low. Paying all that off early just to feel debt free, well, it isn't always the mathematical optimal move, even if it might feel emotionally satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah. And that means the numbers and the feelings don't always point in the same direction on this one
No,
either. Yeah.
exactly. And that's really the tension running through this whole episode. Part of what a financial service professional helps with is figuring out which of those two should carry more weight in a given situation.
Yeah. That's a good nuance there. So, what comes next?
Well, sign 4 is stress testing the retirement budget. This one's about moving past wishful thinking and actually running the numbers, Tony.
Yeah. Well, what would a stress test like that involve, Albert?
Well, it starts with at first a detailed budget that covers essential expenses like housing, healthcare, food, insurance, along with discretionary spending like travel, hobbies, and entertainment. From there, we suggest running a few different scenarios.
Okay. What exactly do you mean by different scenarios? What do
Yep.
those look like?
So let's say, for example, one scenario for the expected lifestyle as planned, one for reduced spending in case markets underperform for a stretch, and then one that accounts for higher healthcare costs or some other contingency that could be higher. If projected income comfortably covers baseline expenses with a, let's say, a buffer across those scenarios, that could be a strong sign of readiness.
Sure, but that sounds like homework. So I'm sure a lot of people skip that, right?
It's understandable why people skip it, but I'm going to say it can feel tedious, but it tends to be one of the more reassuring exercises available. I've seen so many of my clients go through this and be nervous and look at it that way, but afterwards feel like, oh my gosh, it was a good eye opener because seeing the numbers hold up under, let's say, a worst case scenario could really ease a lot of the anxieties that we're talking about here on an early basis.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is really good, Albert, but people need to work with somebody like yourself to make sure their plan is in place and that they are ready to retire and aren't going to make expensive mistakes. You need a pro who does this day in and day out. How can our listeners get a hold of you if they want to reach you for questions or set up that no cost, no obligation consultation?
Yeah, folks, if any of this has you thinking about, let's say, your own retirement picture, just give us a call, 586-752-7008, or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. That's Kaizen, Kaizen, to set up your complimentary consultation. Remember, we'd welcome the chance to look at your full situation with you and show you what your numbers look like.
All right. I think we're on sign number 5. What's
Yes.
that one?
Well, having a healthcare strategy that's both funded and understood. That's number 5. Healthcare tends to represent one of the largest and most unpredictable expenses in retirement, Tony.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's especially true for those who are retiring before they hit Medicare age, right?
Right. Let's say if someone retires before 65 and there's a gap to plan for before Medicare eligibility kicks in. That gap could be covered a few different ways, whether that's COBRA coverage, marketplace insurance, or let's say a spouse's employer plan.
Yeah, and if you have to pay for it yourself or go out into the marketplace to find a plan, or use Cobra, those three options are really, really expensive
Yes,
for
yes,
health
they are.
insurance.
Mhm.
But once Medicare does kick in, is it pretty straightforward from there? It's still pretty complex, right?
I would say, yeah, not entirely
Yeah.
straightforward. In fact, it's worth understanding how Medicare Parts A, B, and D work together and whether a Medigap policy or a Medicare Advantage plan could make sense for the situation. Then, on top of that, we generally recommend a dedicated emergency fund specifically for out of pocket medical expenses, separate from a general emergency fund.
So readiness here really means two things, right?
It does. In fact, identifying the coverage strategy and actually funding it.
You're
So
right.
both pieces matter. A plan on paper that isn't backed by savings isn't much of a plan in practice. So this is also an area where it could make sense to lean toward overestimating the cost rather than underestimating them. Like I said, the worst case scenario. Healthcare expenses in retirement have a way of surprising even well prepared households, especially once long term care enters the picture down the road.
Yeah. Well, and that's a whole separate topic, long-term care, right?
It can be, yes, but it belongs somewhere in the overall plan, whether that's a
Sure.
long term care policy, self funding through savings, or some hybrid approach. It's worth having on the radar alongside the more immediate healthcare strategies.
Yeah. And that makes sense. So what's sign number 6?
No, whether the portfolio is positioned for distribution, not just accumulation. This is as much a mental shift as it is a financial one.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're creatures of habits, Tony. For decades, the goal is typically to save and grow. But then when we get to retirement, the goal shifts towards spending strategically while still allowing what's left to keep growing. If, let's say, someone has worked with an advisor to restructure their allocation to be more conservative, and then they've established an actual withdrawal strategy, possibly even a bucket approach with short-term cash reserves, that reflects the kind of strategic work that could separate a hopeful retirement from a generally prepared one.
Mhm. Is there a tax piece to this as
Of
well? I assume
course.
there is. Yeah.
Of course, there
Yeah.
could be. In fact, which accounts get tapped first? That's a question. Whether that's taxable, tax deferred, or tax free, that could have a meaningful impact on lifetime tax liability. So, pulling too much from a tax deferred account in a single year, for example, could push someone into a higher bracket or trigger higher Medicare premiums, IRMA. It's not just about having the money, Tony, it's about assessing it in the right order.
Sure. And so that brings us to the last sign, number 7. What's that one?
Being able to clearly articulate a social security strategy. This decision tends to get made too casually and it carries lifetime implications.
Well, this sounds important. So, what should we actually be thinking through here?
Well, it could mean analyzing your break even points, considering spousal and survivor benefits if married, and even making a deliberate decision about when to claim, whether that's as early as 62, at full retirement age, or as late as 70.
Right. And waiting comes with some advantages, right?
Yes, it could. In fact, delaying Social Security until age 70 obviously increases benefits by roughly 8% per year after full retirement age, which is guaranteed return that's difficult to replicate elsewhere in a portfolio. But that said, readiness here isn't necessarily about choosing to delay. Some people need the income sooner, and that's a completely valid choice, too. Readiness is about understanding the trade off well enough to make the decision deliberately.
Yeah, good point. And for married people, is this really just one decision or is it two?
Well, it's worth thinking of it as one household decision rather than two independent ones.
Sure.
Coordinating claiming strategies between spouses, especially around spousal and survivor benefits, could meaningfully change the total lifetime income a household receives. So, we'll sometimes see couples where each person made their own choice about when to claim without ever running the numbers together, and that could leave money on the table.
Sure. Sure. Well, let's take stock. I mean, you've given us a lot to think about. You've gone through savings benchmarks.
Mhm.
You've talked about income diversification, debt, budget stress testing, healthcare, portfolio positioning, social security strategies. If somebody's checking most or all of these boxes, what can they take away from that?
Well, honestly, the biggest takeaway might be about the feeling itself, not the numbers. The psychological transition to retirement often lags behind the actual financial reality. Both ways, good and bad. It's a significant life change, and it's understandable for the emotional adjustment to take longer than the financial one does.
Okay. If the numbers check out, but somebody still feels uncertain, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not prepared, right?
Right, definitely. Look, if someone wants an objective gut check, that's really where working with a financial service professional could add value. Running a full retirement analysis could provide validation that isn't just coming from inside your own head, but is instead coming from the actual numbers. Then there's also some encouraging context worth mentioning. Vanguard's research suggests younger generations are on track to be better prepared for retirement than current retirees, largely due to improved access to workplace retirement plans and stronger plan designs in the last, decade.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had started much earlier, and I made
Yes.
sure my kids did start
Mhm.
with their first jobs right out of college. So, and I think this is a helpful thing to hear if somebody's listening today and they feel behind, right?
It definitely could be. In fact, the landscape has shifted quite a bit even over the last decade or two, which is worth keeping in mind. Tools like automatic enrollment and stronger default investment options simply weren't as common a generation ago. So today's savers are often starting from a stronger foundation.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I think this feels like a good time for our weekly reminder. What do you have for us?
If any of what we've talked about today has you thinking about your own plan, whether that's your savings benchmark, your healthcare strategy, or even your Social Security decisions, please reach out to us, to Kaizen Financial Incorporated. Our number is 586-752-7008, or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. Kaizen, Kaizen. A conversation with someone who understands your full financial picture could help you figure out where you actually stand so you can own your retirement.
All right. Well put. Thanks for another great show, Albert. Listeners and viewers, that does it for today's episode of Own Your Retirement with our host, Albert Lalonde.
Take care, everyone.